Meet Mark Fagan. He's a Trump supporter, a lawful gun owner, rides motorcycles, drives for Uber, and he's even written a couple screenplays. On October 19, 2016, Fagan was arrested and charged with making a criminal threat and annoying phone calls against the Islamic Center of Southern California by the Los Angeles Police Department and then California Attorney General Kamala Harris. Prior to these charges, Fagan did not have a criminal record. LAPD officers accused Fagan of making 2 threatening phone calls, and then they claimed that they'd traced the phone calls back to him, later labeling the calls as a hate crime against Muslims. On October 19, 2016, Fagan's home was raided by the LAPD and his weapons were confiscated and placed on display for the media during a press conference. The California media and the LAPD were both complicit in portraying Fagan as a potential mass murderer.
The male caller threatened to kill the person who answered the phone, along with other members of the center, because of the caller's hatred for Muslims and his belief that Muslims will destroy the United States.
That was a statement made by Commander Horace Frank with the Los Angeles Police Department in a press conference in October 2016. During the press conference, photographs of Fagan's guns and ammunition were put on display to further the LAPD narrative that Fagan was planning to carry out a violent hate crime against the Islamic Center.
A Columbine type event. When I see something like that, when I see the number of rounds the suspect had, the type of weapon that he had, he could have very easily barged into our facility, and, the worst comes to mind.
That statement was made by Omar Ricci, a spokesperson for the Islamic Center of Southern California, who was suggesting that Fagan was planning on carrying out a Columbine-style attack. Various media outlets, along with the Council for American Islamic Relations, known as CAIR, accused Fagan of plotting a massacre against the Islamic Community Center. Rebel Media has obtained new documents and evidence through police disclosure surrounding the case, which proves that the first phone call that was made to the Islamic Center actually came from the phone of a different California man, Michael Slawson. On April 18, 2017, Michael Slawson and his lawyer, Dominic Church, had an interview with LAPD detectives. Slauson told police that he called the Islamic Center to engage in a debate about Islam. In an audio recording of the LAPD's interview with Slauson, Slauson admits that he made numerous calls to the Islamic Center on various different occasions. Michael Slawson is the son of democratically appointed Los Angeles Superior Court Judge John Slauson. In other words, Slauson's father is a judge in the same court system under which Fagan has been charged.
Okay, Mr. Slauson, the whole reason that we came in contact with you is because we had a case that we were working on, and it was at a mosque, and it looks like your phone number came up on their phone bill. So that's why we're here. We're here just to ask you about that. Back in September of 2016, you made a phone call to the Islamic Center of Southern California. Do you remember that?
I do remember making a call to them, but I do not remember that date.
Slauson admitted to LAPD officers that he called the Islamic Center, but on a different day. Even more concerning, audio recording of Slauson's interrogation could leave the perception of special favors and nepotism. When the LAPD officers are heard telling Dominic Church, Slauson's lawyer, quote, "We just take the reports as they're claimed, and it's men like his brother who decide the legal question." The officers are referring to Dominic Church's brother, former LA City Attorney Carmen Church.
And again, like my partner said, we're not the arbiters of annoyance and what constitutes such. So we just take the reports as they're claimed, and it's men like his brother who have to sit down and read our reports, which is basically a list of facts, and decide whether or not you were or were not annoying. And a reasonable person would assume that what you were doing was pretty darn annoying.
The Rebel reached out to Michael Slawson for a comment about why the documented call to the Islamic Center is listed as being made from his phone. He answered the phone, and then he hung up. We also reached out to Dominic Church's office by phone and email. He also refused to comment. The prosecution provided Fagan and his attorney with phone records from Fagan and the Islamic Center on December 23, 2016, and then Slauson's phone records on May 8, 2017. Fagan and his lawyers say Fagan didn't make these calls, and the prosecution's own evidence in the form of phone records and an interview with Slauson shows that Fagan didn't make these phone calls.
Well, Mark was misidentified, and whatever the initial reasons for it, it should have been caught right away. The individual who called the police and said Mark Fagan made a threatening phone call, that individual was wrong. Mark never called. The police should have found that out. They should have found that out within 5 minutes by doing some basic investigation. And they didn't. Instead, they simply pursued this case without looking at some of the basic investigatory resources that were available, such as phone records.
The alleged hate crime that Feigin was charged with was documented in the form of a written statement of the phone call by Mohammed Popote, an Islamic Center employee who said he answered the phone when the phone calls were made. Popote told law enforcement that based on the voice tone, the same person made both calls to the Islamic Center, which were made on September 19th and 20th of 2016. According to a written statement by Popote, quote, recognized the unknown male voice from the call he received on September 20th as the same voice he heard on the voice message he listened to on September 19th, end quote. The September 19th voicemail is a 56-second call that appears on the Islamic Center records as number 766 at 15:26:48 UTC, Greenwich time. So what you would do is you would subtract 7 hours to get Pacific time. Phone records provided by the prosecutor correlate Slauson's admitted phone call on September 19th with his phone number. According to Popote, the person who called on September 19th was the same person who called on September 20th, which strongly suggests that it was Slauson who made the phone calls, not Fagan. Fagan told The Rebel that he believes the LAPD tricked him into thinking that he made the phone calls during an interrogation, when they told him that they had a recording of his voice on voicemail.
They told me the call came from my cell phone, is what they said. This is your voice. They said, we know it's your voice.
So why did you admit to making one of the phone calls?
Well, it wasn't quite an admission, as my attorneys pointed out. I said that if it came from my cell phone, it was probably me. Again, nobody uses my cell phone but myself.
According to the interrogation summary and discovery, Fagan admitted he made the phone call because the Islamic Center blocked his post. However, the phone records reveal that Fagan did not make the call, which would mean it was not his voice that LAPD officers played for him. Fagan admitted that he posted several comments on the Islamic Center's Facebook page that disagreed with their faith, and that he has a short temper. He described his opinions as aggressive. However, based on the phone records, it's clear that Fagan was charged without LAPD having proof of him ever making the phone calls.
Now, this is an example of something we see a lot, unfortunately, in wrongful conviction cases, where the police and the prosecution latch onto a particular subject, and they think that subject is clearly a fit for the crime. As the individual at the Islamic Center told the police, he, quote, fits the profile. That was his words. So we have a person who the police and the prosecutor think is a good fit for the crime. They have a crime that they very much want to pursue, and they want to get a conviction. So they bypassed, unfortunately, a lot of the basic steps that they should have taken early on to determine that he is not the person who made any calls. He never called the Islamic Center.
After obtaining phone records from the prosecutor that proved that Slauson made the first phone call, Fagan filed a complaint to the California Department of Justice. Shortly after, the annoying phone call charges were suddenly dropped, and Kamala Harris's office informed Fagan and his lawyer that the LAPD would trace the source of the alleged hate crime call. The Rebel reached out to the LAPD, specifically Anita McKeon and Kenneth Bryant, two of the main detectives who were involved in this case, to ask them why Fagan was arrested before the phone records were examined. Detective Bryant never returned our call, and Detective McKeon declined to comment and suggested we call the LAPD Public Information Office. Tony Im, a public information officer for the LAPD, said, quote, "It's currently in the hands of the court and is being investigated." Despite the fact that Slauson's phone records and the Islamic Center's phone records show that Slauson made one of the threatening phone calls, he was never charged or listed as a suspect in the criminal case. So it appears as though there wasn't, an adequate investigation that took place prior to Mark being arrested. Do you believe that LAPD officers failed to look at phone records prior to arresting Mark?
That is one of the questions that we have for the court, and we've asked the court to order the prosecution to produce evidence of their internal decision-making process that led up to his arrest. I do know that a full month elapsed between the initial call to the police and Mark's arrest. Why during that time nobody thought to get the phone records from the center and look at them is beyond me. I mean, that is the first thing that you would do when you have an alleged case of a phone threat, is you look at phone records. You call the phone company, you get the phone records, and you see if the person did it. It appears from the discovery production that we have so far in this case that the police came out here, arrested Mark, searched his house, and then had a big press conference declaring him to be a dangerous individual without ever having looked at either his phone records or the Islamic Center's phone records. To me, That is a failure of the basic obligation of professionalism in doing an investigation.
The September 19th call made to the Islamic Center is not the first time Michael Slawson has called an Islamic Center. Slauson's phone records show that he, or someone using his phone, has made repeated calls to Islamic centers and mosques across the country, even making up to 10 calls in a single day. On Slauson's phone records, items number 144 all the way to items 153 reveal phone calls made from Slauson's phones to various Islamic centers across the country. Following the Slauson interview, the prosecution did not drop the charges against Feigin or charge Slauson with annoying phone calls, despite the evidence in the phone records. Instead, they returned to the Islamic Center and asked its employees to reconfirm that Feigin was the caller by interviewing witnesses before a preliminary hearing. On December 16, 2016, before the prosecution even provided the phone records for Feigin, the Islamic Center, and Slauson, Kamala Harris's office sent Feigin a plea deal. The plea deal Feigin received from Harris further suggests that Feigin was wrongfully charged and targeted for his political beliefs. In the plea letter, Harris laid out a list of requirements that Feigin needed to complete, some of which included sensitivity training, community service supervised by the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and denouncing the alt-right and KKK. Harris's office asked Feigin to denounce what they perceived to be a right-wing ideology and branded him as a racist, despite the fact that he's a libertarian and a self-proclaimed expert on African American history. Feigin has written 2 screenplays about African Americans and describes himself as half Jewish and half Catholic, making him a less than ideal candidate for the KKK. The Rebel reached out to the Attorney General's office and asked them why they asked a private citizen to denounce a political ideology and why the charges against Feigin have not been dropped. We did not receive a reply. Do you think that it's appropriate for political authorities and members of law enforcement to be asking private citizens to denounce political ideologies?
That's strange, and I do think it's inappropriate. It's not something that I have seen before. It's not something that I would have done as a prosecutor. I don't think it's appropriate in the United States of America for prosecutors to be wielding the threat of prison time to get people to make political statements, whether it's adherence to an ideology or renunciation of an ideology or a political party or a religious movement or anything. We don't do that.
These false accusations, along with the spectacular media coverage of his case, has negatively impacted Feigin's life. He has incurred a large financial debt due to the growing legal fees, he's faced defamation in the media, and has even been ostracized by members of his community, all of which has caused him severe emotional distress. The media, LAPD, Kamala Harris, and Muslim advocacy groups such as CARE have shown no reservations in their attempt to make Feigin a political talking point.
You can't imagine what it's done to my reputation as a person, what it's done to my livelihood, what it has done to my family. I mean, the trauma that my parents experienced. My mom suffered health problems and high blood pressure issues. I've suffered from anxiety and other related conditions. Physically and mentally, it's been devastating. There is nothing worse than starting your day one morning, your normal work day, and paying your taxes, and paying taxes to the state of California that funds our police and funds our Department of Justice, and have those same people use your tax funds to destroy you.
Feigin's case is a classic example of prosecutorial negligence on behalf of the California Attorney General's Office and the LAPD. According to the Los Angeles Times, the Los Angeles Police Department paid nearly $81 million in legal settlements last fiscal year. In 2016, the city's largest payout in the last fiscal year was $16.7 million to resolve a lawsuit for a wrongful conviction. The California Attorney General's Office, Michael Slawson, and his lawyer Dominic Church were all contacted and given a fair opportunity to comment on this video before its production. However, they all declined to comment. But if they decide to comment, the Rebel will add their comments to the investigation. For TheRebel.media, I'm Laura Loomer. If you enjoyed this video, please click like below and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you want to see more investigative journalism that the mainstream media is not reporting on, please support RebelInvestigates.com.